There we go. It's come
Okay,
up.
the recording started.
Right. In terms of etiquette, may I remind everyone present this meeting will be live streamed and recorded via the internet, and that this recording archived for future viewing. Could all participants mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? If a committee member wishes to speak, can they please put their hand up if they can be seen, or to use the hand up option on the application? If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard, then they should let the chair or Democratic Services officer know as soon as possible, possibly via the chat. If you have a webcam and you are having problems with your bandwidth, then try turning off your webcam so at least you can hear and be heard. If required, participants can dial into the meeting using a telephone. The number was provided beforehand. If for any technical reason any person part of the proceedings is unable to hear, then the hearing will be adjourned for a short time to allow contact to be made. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function. For the sake of the recording, the chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues, and the allocated public speaking minutes will be adhered to strictly. I hope that's clear. So any debate or whatever, please through the chair. Right. Welcome everyone to the meeting. First of all, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We've had formal apologies received from Councillors Wendy Gilligan and Eddie Williams.
Yeah. Are there any other apologies for absence, please? I see no hands or anything else. Thank you. Right, moving on then to item 2, minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of September 2022. Can I ask Charles?
There's a correction, unless it's been noted before, that Liz Burnett was at the meeting, but she wasn't the deputy leader, I don't think, at the time.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so subject to that amendment, can we accept the minutes, please? Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Anthony. Right, item 3, declarations of interest under the Council's Code of Conduct. If there are any, please indicate now.
None formally received, Chair.
None formally received. I see no hands up either. So moving on then to the reports. Item
Sorry,
4.
Chair. Councillor Perry's indicating he wanted to speak.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm supposed to declare this, but I think 3 of the 5 applications tonight are in my ward.
No, there's no need to declare that.
No. Okay, good.
Although, if you want to speak on those, then please indicate when they come up, and as ward member, I will call you first when it comes to the discussion.
Thank you.
Item 4, building regs, applications and other building control matters. This is for noting. I assume everyone's happy with that. I see no one hands. Item 5, planning applications determined by the head of regeneration planning under delegated powers. Again, this is for noting. And again, I see no comments. Item 6, appeals. Now, there are no appeal resolutions, but there are 5 appeals noted. I don't know, Ian Robinson, whether there's anything you want to comment on those?
Thanks, Chair. Probably the only one I'd highlight would be the enforcement appeal relating to the enforcement notice at the biomass plant in Barry.
Yeah.
That appeal has been formally started now. It's scheduled to be an inquiry, which preliminary kind of estimated date for the inquiry is given by PEDU is March next year. They hope to have a determination date of 12th of June, which is my birthday, so that would be a present and a half. But yeah, as of currently, there's a consultation process underway where consultees and members of the public are being invited to make any comments in relation to the appeal and the environmental statement. The council will be responsible for submitting the statement in November, I believe, and I think members will have received, I think, or due to receive an email from the cabinet member relating to a briefing to just kind of just outline the current position, and I think that will kind of put more meat on the bones of where we are with the appeal and what the process is likely to entail.
Yeah, I think we've all received the invite from Councillor Sivinianum
Okay.
on that matter, so we those interested will attend, I'm sure. In that case, the appeals, as is in the report, are for noting also, as is item 7, the trees, which is the delegated list. I believe that's just for noting, which brings us on to the planning applications, which is the body of the meeting, I guess. Item 1, 2021-00423/full, the land at Bolton House, Bonvilston. Now, there are matters arising that we've all been notified of in via email, which you've all had a chance to, I'm sure, had a chance to read. And we do have speakers. Now, I think we only have one speaker on this, and that's Mr. John, who's speaking in favour of the application as the agent. So, Geraint, if you are there.
I am, Chair.
Right, I'd remind you, you have 3 minutes as per normal, and you know the routine, and Democratic will warn you when there's 30 seconds left to go.
Of course, understood.
And your time starts when you start.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, members. Firstly, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you on this item. I speak for both this planning application and the related conservation area consent application that follows on today's agenda, effectively to seek your agreement to defer any decision on these applications. The request is to allow further time to review, assess and respond to issues in the report accordingly. It's our view that given this is a stance report before you today, and I'm sure your officers will explain that to you, and I'm sure you're already aware and familiar, there's no need to make a determination today for the reasons I'll expand on. As you'll note from the report, an appeal against non-determination has been lodged against both applications, owing to what we consider to be delays of progressing and determining the applications. These delays, along with the lack of circulation of consultation responses, has led to the point now reached. Consultation responses have only just been received in the last fortnight, which should have been received a number of months prior. In our view, it's not robust that a decision is made with comments contained in this report, which are indeed out of date and do not reflect the current scheme as submitted. The proposals before you have been with officers since December 21, i.e. last year, in their present form. The initial application proposed a scheme of lesser number of units and was submitted even earlier in March 21. Throughout the process, significant changes have been made, primarily to increase, at officers' requests, the unit numbers. A number of submissions have been made, increasing the site layout from the originally submitted 8 units to now 14 units. As I say, these changes respond to density concerns expressed by officers. In addition to a denser layout of 14, improved access arrangements, landscape mitigation for tree removal, and an acoustic assessment were submitted. It was understood that these revised plans and materials all address previous all concerns, and no matters were outstanding. A viability assessment was then undertaken on and against this scheme fix. Notwithstanding this, there are 6 reasons for refusal on the committee report. This is extremely surprising to us, considering that we were under the impression and were informed by officers that the submission in March addressed all previously concerned points, other than the planning balance. It would appear that a change of case officer soon after the revised submission led to consultation responses not being forwarded and moreover a different view being taken. This justifies, in our view, the deferral request before you and the issues, not least because the issues have only just been made known to us at the point of publication of the committee report. For these reasons, we consider it only right, fair and appropriate to defer at this stage until further time has been afforded to respond to these matters. Thank you very much for your time.
If you just hold on for a moment, Geraint, while I see if anybody has any questions, arising from what you've had to say. Again, I see no hands, and I see there you are, Councillor Champion. Councillor Champion, you had your hand up?
Yeah. My understanding was that you actually asked for this to come to committee today.
As the applicant?
Yes.
No, not necessarily, no. Officers are duty bound to present a report to you, of course, as part of the process and the appeal, to inform your stance to take at appeal. However, the appeal process is running so slowly that there is no start date yet on the appeal, and therefore there's no beginning at this particular point, and is unlikely to be for a good number of weeks yet still, possibly even a couple of months.
Okay.
So
yeah, I mean, that's answered, I think, Councillor Champion's question. Do you have a further follow-up, Councillor Champion, or are there any other questions?
No follow-up.
Thank you. Right, moving on now, as I see no other hands up. Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Mr. John. We'll move on to the discussion then amongst the committee. Ian, would you perhaps it'd be helpful if you address the situation first?
Yes, Chair, fine. I'm just happy to kind of set out the main points as we see it, and maybe respond to some of Mr. John's points for clarity for members. So just going through it, there are 6 reasons for refusal recommended in the report. One relates to impact on conservation area. One relates to density, one relates to highways, one relates to potential noise impact, one relates to kind of ecology and the tests involved where protected species are involved, and the last one kind of relates to section 106 and viability. I'll try and keep this brief because there is 6, but I'll just run through the council's kind of position in respect of those. So the development results in loss of a fair chunk of what is identified as being a significant stone wall, and a lot of vegetation at the front of the site, which would fundamentally, in our view, change the character harmfully of the site, and consequently the conservation area, where there is a test to either preserve or enhance. Density has been increased, but it's still well below the density requirements of the council's LDP policy. The density issue is a one to balance, because there obviously are certain constraints within the site which mean that the net developable area won't necessarily be the whole site. So we're not advocating that every square inch of the site is kind of used, if you like, for plots and dwellings. But at the same time, even if you agree the net developable area, there's that area is still being developed or proposed to be developed in a not a dense enough way with large dwellings. Smaller dwellings could easily achieve a higher density in our view. In terms of the highways issues, it's a technical point. The radii on the way into the site, our highways engineer has identified that it's not appropriate and potentially can result in vehicles having to sort of slow down too much and not be able to turn into the site in the way you normally expect, which could cause a free flow of traffic and highway safety issue. Just in respect to the consultation responses, it is unfortunate that the second set weren't forwarded earlier. However, the point I would make is that the initial highways comments set out what will be needed to be a safe radii. These amendments were submitted, and whilst the comments weren't sent on as quickly as they may have been, the amended plans clearly failed to respond to the concerns raised in the first, so that there should have been no expectation that the comments in respect to the second would have been positive, because they didn't deal with what the initial highway engineer's comments. In respect of changes, the applicant and the agent are keen that the council take on board these proposed further highways changes, which have been submitted to us after the matters arising deadline. Our concern here is that, and as you mentioned earlier, an appeal against non-determination has been submitted, and we need to, this application is a committee matter, and we need to bring the application to committee to understand committee's stance that we take forward into the appeal. So we have to do that. We can't delay doing that. And as far as I'm concerned, an appeal has been submitted at a point in time against in respect of a specific scheme. So that's the scheme that we're reporting today. So we don't feel it's appropriate to then amend the highways access after the point the appeal is submitted. Now, if an inspector was minded to accept changes to the scheme after the appeal was submitted, then that's something they would bring to our attention, and theoretically they may ask for our comments after that, albeit we wouldn't be happy with the prospect of plans being changed after an appeal is submitted. So we don't believe that this prejudices the applicant in any way, because, as I said, if the inspector feels that there's scope for amendments to be taken into account, that they will do so. In respect of the ecology issues, the 3 tests we go through when we're assessing whether a derogation is appropriate where there's a protected species on site, one of them is that there's a kind of a reason of overriding public interest, why the derogation should be granted and why the species may be disturbed. Now, in this case, in the absence of an acceptable scheme otherwise, we've considered that it doesn't pass the first test. And in respect of viability, there are certain issues. In particular, I draw your attention to kind of public open space and education, where there are impacts associated with the development which would not be mitigated by a proposal which failed to provide infrastructure contributions to deal with that. In respect of delays, as a general point, officers were considering this and considering all of these issues in the round against a scheme which did involve provision of affordable housing. And it was very late in the day that the applicant, now the appellant, advised us that they couldn't provide affordable housing. Now, in the planning balance, suddenly taking affordable housing out of the scheme has quite an impact, in our view, on the acceptability of it and the positives to weigh against some issues which may be seen as negatives or harmful. So that's perhaps why the stance is now as it is in respect of certain issues which theoretically may or may not have been overridden by or outweighed, should I say, by affordable housing provision. Let me see if I've got any other points. I think that's it. If I haven't responded to anything that members want clarification on, please let me know and I'll try and do that.
Do you have a view on the benefit or otherwise, or problems with deferral?
With deferral,
yeah.
I personally, I don't see that it prejudices the applicant because they submitted an appeal. I think if we do that now, then that means that the officers, in considering the appeal and preparing the appeal statement, aren't able to do that in the knowledge of what committee's stance is, and we need to know that in order to kind of put together the appeal statement as needed by its deadline. It was the applicant's decision to submit the appeal, and as Mr. John mentioned, we do need to bring this to committee to understand committee's stance. So I can't see any merit or reason for deferring it.
Thank you for that, Ian. Right. I open now to discussion. Ian, I think yours is your ward, I believe.
Yeah.
If you'd like to speak briefly.
Point of order. Ian's just spoken, but shouldn't Ian have spoken before the guest speaker, Geraint John? Because that's the way it normally is. Because now I've got more questions. That was partly that was my fault. I will remedy that next time. But yes, thank you for pointing that out. Because now we've probably got more questions for Geraint than we did after Geraint had spoken. No, because the questions for Geraint are based entirely on what he says, not on other things that may come up within the discussion. Well, okay. Yes. So obviously it's my ward, and this has been dragging on a long time, and obviously the last few years has been difficult, and we're experiencing some determination happening incredibly quickly, 28 days, and other things that seem to be dragging on for months and months, and in some cases years, and that does seem to be a problem, because I know I've got another one in my ward which has been dragging on for at least 2 years now, and they're wondering when the determination is going to happen. So there are obviously issues somewhere that final decisions are not being made. I'm concerned, Ian, that if we say, we make a decision today to agree with officers' recommendations, then we lose control, because it will go to a planning inspector, rather than perhaps we can negotiate some changes. I know the community council's got objections. I think the scheme could be better, and I've read the report this last week, and I think the officer has made some very, very, very valid points, and we've not had that information until a few days ago. So community council doesn't know certain things that have been said, and the applicant doesn't know certain things that have been said. And I was reading an article about British cheese the other day, and how the then Prince Charles brought different people together to try and find a solution. And obviously the applicant wants a deferral and perhaps some more negotiation. I believe the community might welcome the opportunity to have more discussions. The community council, has objections, and maybe those could be overcome, and there could be further discussions. I don't know if that's possible, but I think deferral and keeping this within the Vale Council rather than going to a planning inspector is potentially beneficial. I can see someone's raised a hand at that point. If I can come back later, maybe they want to add something as well.
Well, no, actually, it probably won't be. I mean, you need to say what you need to say now. It's not a debate. We have to do it within terms of the committee. So, I mean, if you have anything to add, then add it now.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a debate. I mean, certain things that come up that are kind of strange, and I'm not the oldest person in my community, but I'm old enough to actually remember stone walls being built along the A48 in Bombleston, and yet now if you want to touch any of those stone walls, you can't because it's conservation area. And yet, I haven't got that many grey hairs yet. I remember half of them being built. I remember when they weren't there. I can tell you what was there before. In one case, Google Street View took a picture of where there is now a wall that's protected by the conservation area. So we seem to be conserving strange things. In the report, the beer garden of the red line came up. I think that's very important to consider the effect on the red line. We're losing lots of pubs, and we don't want to have a negative impact on the red line. I don't know if that's been brought forward by the planning officers before, but that is something.
It's relevant to this application either.
Well, it was in the final report, so I'm just mentioning that. So yeah, I mean, in terms of community council, I think the community council initially complained about density, but then were happier with the new required density. As for the highways radii, in the next fortnight, the Welsh Government's going to publish new speed limit guidance, and with a view of bringing in 20-mile-an-hour speed limit as of September next year. So the radii going into this development wouldn't need to be so wide, because you're not expecting people to be turning in off a 40-mile-an-hour road. It's highly likely that the road outside will be 20 miles an hour, if not 30 miles an hour, in the next 12 months. So I do sympathise with the applicant on that one, and we haven't really got enough information. So I guess I'll have to shut up and listen to other people. Yeah.
Mr. John, you can't come back in, I'm afraid. It's not within the provision of the of the meeting. Councillor Cave, please. Christine?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to take my camera off. I didn't hear Geraint John say that he was asking us to defer so that he could then withdraw his application for non-determination. And that's what I would have wanted to have heard in order to have made the decision to defer. Because I do think the grounds which the officers have put to us for refusal are quite strong. In fact, I think they're very strong. And, just for the loss of this green lung, this another little green oasis that's being taken away, just from the point of view of ecology and unneighbourliness, they're two really good reasons why I think if this did come to committee, we would definitely refuse. So I don't know whether I missed anything, whether there was a call to withdraw the non-determination, because that's what I'd like to hear in order for us.
I don't think you missed it, Christine, at all. But I believe this was part of the LDP, so it is approved for development in the first place. The one that's up for replacement now. But this, you're quite right. This is the application we are looking at now, and not any putative or possibly amended. This is what the appeal has been made on, and it's whether we can give guidance to that non-determination appeal through a decision now, I think is what's being asked. Ian, you're next.
Thanks, Chair. Just on some of those points, it is within settlement of Almost, and it's not allocated, but just for members aware, it's not allocated for housing. It's kind of within the LDP insofar as it's within the settlement. I'm struggling a bit with this because the reason this is here is because the applicant submitted an appeal against non-determination. So I'm kind of struggling with the idea of asking us to defer it because it's only here for that reason. I appreciate what Councillor Perry's saying regarding it being with an inspector or not, but it's with PEDU now. That's where it is now. So that's why we're having to do this dance report, making this decision today, and kind of in terms of the stance. That's not what takes it in front of the inspector. It's there because the applicant has submitted a non-determination appeal. A couple of other quick points of clarification. Not all of the stone walls along the A48 are identified as significant stone walls, so that kind of extra status or level of protection isn't afforded to all of them. Certain walls are. So I don't think it's the case that all stone walls are sacrosanct, but this one is of particular note given its length and height. Regarding the beer garden, it is taken into account insofar as the acoustic assessment wasn't considered to be sufficiently robust in terms of the potential noise factors. It mainly focused on road traffic noise. So the consideration of the SRS officer was that it should also take into account that, because we don't want to be sort of stifling, that use. In terms of the speed limit, I mean, it may be the case that it does change in the future, but we have to determine this planning application or stance report on the basis of where we are now. If we were to consider it acceptable because we think the speed limit's going to change, and then the speed limit doesn't change and it's not a safe access, I think we'd rightly be criticised for being kind of preemptive in an assumption of the speed limit. So I would highly recommend against making the main consideration in the safety of the access, the fact that there may be a change in speed limit in the future.
Right, thank you. Nick Hodges, Councillor Hodges, you've got your hand up now.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I've been around a bit on planning. My understanding is, as I think I've heard, is that if we have an appeal for non-determination, we need to show not only the officers but now PEDU what our stance is, and we need to make a decision. And I'm happy to hear more debate, but I will move officers' recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Hodges.
Yeah, I'll second.
Yeah,
Thank you, Christine. Mark Wilson, you have your hand.
Yeah, I'd like to also support the seconding on that. I think we had a very good debate about it, and I do think we need to move on to the vote. Thank you.
Yep. Councillor Champion, you have your hand up.
I was just going to move as Councillor Hodges has. So
there we go. Multiple movers. We will move then on to the decision. Can I assume from people, Christine, do you have your hand up for another reason, or is that a legacy?
That's a legacy, Chair.
Okay, thank you. In that case, we seem to be in a position where we can move on. Unless I see a hand to the contrary, I will assume officers' recommendations are approved. I see nobody opposing that. In that case, officers' recommendations are approved, and this committee does not accept the application. We move on then to 2021-00424, the conservation area one, and Ian Robinson. Perhaps you can just take us through this, which I think should be brief, as the main part has fallen. This is about the wall.
Yeah, this conservation area consent application relates to demolition. It's the demolition of the house and the part of the wall at the front. The existing dwelling is not highly visible. Generally speaking, conservation area policy and the way we treat conservation area consent applications is that the loss of a building where not in itself harmful to the conservation area can be acceptable, particularly where there's a scheme for redevelopment. Obviously, in the absence of a planning approval for redevelopment, there isn't an acceptable scheme for replacement of the building that's being lost. But furthermore, the loss of the portion of the significant stone wall at the front of the site without kind of justification is particularly harmful in our view in terms of just the demolition alone. So we're not looking at the scheme that's going back, it's just the kind of the loss of fabric within the conservation area. Hypothetically, you may have a scenario where you would accept the loss of fabric where there was a scheme for development which was both acceptable and had positive benefits. I referred to affordable housing earlier as an example, positive benefits that kind of outweigh harm. It's a judgment call in those instances, but in the absence of something where you would attribute kind of positive weight to, we're of the view that it's kind of unjustified and harmful demolition.
Thank you. Anybody wish to comment? Or I see no hands. Councillor Perks, I think, or Councillor Perry, you had your hand up first, and then Councillor Perks.
I'll just be really quick. Yeah, and I do believe the Community Council has concerns with the loss of that building, which actually consists in part of pieces from what was Bombleston House, and there are concerns that the pillars which were at the front of Bombleston House would be lost. So I believe that if avoidable at all, that building should be preserved, not just because of the culture and the historic value of parts of that building, but also because of the environment. So I'll just finish there. Thank you.
I take it that means you're moving officers' recommendations? Ian?
I'll wait for someone else.
Okay, Sandra.
I was going to move officers' recommendations.
Thank you very much for that. Any other comments?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Christine. In that case, moving on, and Ian, Ian Perry, can you put your hand down? Thank you. Unless I see a hand or indication to the contrary, I assume that officer's recommendations are supported. I see no indication to the contrary, therefore that officer's recommendations are supported on that. We move on then to 2021-01379 full, the quarries, Bonvilleston, and am I right in saying I think we have speakers against and we have late reps as well. Ian Robinson, as Ian Perry pointed out, you do need to lead off on this, and sorry, I should have done that before. I apologise.
Thank you, Chair. Bear with me, I'm just going to share my screen a moment. Remember seeing the plan that's on my screen now?
Yeah.
Great, okay. It's positive after last month. We're all seeing the same plan at the same time. That's good. So this application relates to quarries to the west of Bonvilleston. The quarry is in two parts, kind of what's referred to in the report as the northern and the southern parts. The application proposes, without wishing to oversimplify it, proposes further extraction beyond previously permitted extents in the northern part of the quarry. A recycling and processing operation where waste would be recycled and sorted, and then waste that can't be recycled put into effectively the North Quarry area as forming the basis for the restoration scheme here. This is just a plan that shows the northern and southern parts. The development also involved, there you go, the grey here is identified as being recycling, processing and stocking area. The development also involves improvements to the access between the road and the A48 by widening it, and also a new access into the quarry and some passing bays along the lane. The matters arising relate to, bear with me, they relate to the submission of an ecology survey, which has overcome one of the advertised reasons for refusal. and there is a petition signed by 69 signatories on behalf of Tyrone and Residents Committee objecting to the application in relation to traffic, amenity and biodiversity, and concerns regarding current operations, monitoring operations, and original consent. Now, the main issue remaining for officers is the infill of the northern part and the restoration, and as officers will have, members will have noted from the report, whether that amounts to waste disposal or waste recovery. That's kind of the crux of the issue. Now, there's a waste hierarchy in planning and waste policy, which is shown in the report, and the case officer has given quite a detailed explanation of kind of the principles of the waste hierarchy, and what should be happening with waste, or what should be being considered before you move down the hierarchy. Now, in this case, we consider it to be unjustified waste disposal. So the proposal, as initially submitted, effectively seeks to kind of infill that area and then reprofile it to a similar area level as the adjoining land. In our view, there's no fundamental planning reason why the quarry needs to be restored to that level, and that's atypical of how quarries are generally restored. Guidance and policy suggests that when quarry workings come to the end of their life, that restoration should in essence happen as quickly and efficiently as possible. The applicant's contention has been that it is fundamentally waste recovery. Now, waste recovery is, if I try and put it in sort of simpler terms, it is effectively where you're using waste for a purpose where otherwise something else kind of would have been required to do it. So you'll notice in the officer's report, it talks about the substitution test and whether there's other material that would have been required to do the job that you're kind of making the waste do. Waste can be used for energy. That's a form of waste recovery. And if there are elements of reprofiling and restoration of the quarry that require, or sorry, should I say, parts of the quarry that require reprofiling, maybe to avoid shear faces or in order to create a profile which would assist kind of regeneration and habitat creation, then where the waste is having that kind of useful purpose, then an element of it may be regarded as recovery. But to our mind, this goes far beyond that. Far beyond what could be considered as meeting the terms of waste recovery, and in those circumstances, it is unjustified waste disposal, and there's a significant justification and that needs to be gone into in order to justify a large scale disposal and effectively landfill operation like this. Again, the applicant and the agent have requested this be deferred from committee tonight in order to enable further kind of negotiations, further discussion to take place on what might be an acceptable solution. Initially, we had discussed whether allowing restoration to previously consented levels might be acceptable. So previously consented restoration levels were lower than what is proposed by this application, but significantly higher than the level that the application proposes to take the ground down to. So the officer's position in respect of the previously consented restoration scheme is that yes, that might be acceptable from a kind of a topography and a landscape perspective, but actually when that restoration scheme was consented previously, that was based on a lot less material going into restore it than would be the case now. So by permitting the additional quarry workings, allowing the former restoration scheme would still inherently involve a substantial amount of waste being deposited within the land, which is contrary to waste policy. We have considered the applicant's request to defer this and to allow further discussion, but this has been going on for a long while. Officers' feelings on the kind of the fundamental problem with waste disposal have been made known since February. In our view, those feelings have been made clear, and the applicant has unsurprisingly sought to contest that kind of interpretation of waste policy and sought to kind of try and find a way to justify it, but hasn't been willing to kind of amend the scheme or change the scheme to take account of the fact that we think there's a fundamental problem with what's being proposed, which is that it's a waste disposal operation. So we're of the view that we shouldn't be deferring the application, and enough is enough in terms of the time it's had to run. I can see from the applicant's perspective why they wish it to be deferred, but we have no clear proposal in front of us that says something new that overcomes those issues is going to be happening. So we feel we're in a position where reasonably we should be determining the application, and then the applicant, if they wish to submit a new application to try and overcome that refusal, if it is refused, they can do that without planning fee, accepting that there are some fees or some costs, should I say, associated with putting together a new application, but fundamentally there's not a planning fee. And so we don't feel the applicant is unreasonably prejudiced by committee making a decision today. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Ian. Right, we do have speakers on this. I believe Mr. Ralph, Richard Ralph, you want to speak against. You therefore have priority. You come first. You have 3 minutes as per, I believe you've been told beforehand. You'll be told 30 seconds before your time is up.
Okay,
it starts when you start.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Planning Committee for the opportunity to speak today on behalf of Tyrone residents. We're pleased and relieved to see that the application to use the quarry as a recycling site is recommended for refusal, and hope that the committee will accept the planning officer's recommendations. However, we're most concerned that the officer's report leans towards the acceptance of increased mineral extraction at the quarry, and would urge the committee to also refuse the application for increased mineral extraction. I've submitted a petition signed by 69 residents representing 95% of households in Tyrone and objecting to the application. The concerns voiced from residents regarding current operations include blasting that feels like a minor earthquake, cracks appearing in people's houses internally and externally, photo frames falling from walls during blasting, as well as lasting distress to animals and pets, a noticeable increase in heavy lorry traffic on an already dangerous part of the A48, continual and disruptive daily noise from machinery at nuisance levels that start early in the morning during weekdays and on Saturday mornings, and increased dust levels on cars and windows, and residents considering personal tests for air quality. I'm also aware of an open enforcement action investigating working practices and non-compliance with existing planning conditions. All of these comments are in stark contrast to the Planning Office report of 2009, stating a fundamental element of preparing the scheme of conditions for Pantafunnan Quarry is that it is a well-established quarry that continues to operate without significant levels of complaint. In addition to increased levels of concerns and complaints, the question of lifespan at the quarry and safeguarding of natural resources required for future generations also needs to be considered. The 2009 planning report estimated the quarry only had a remaining lifespan of 3 to 4 years and an output not expected to increase substantially from the current 50,000 tonnes per year due to limited reserves. 13 years later, the current application is to extend the output of the quarry to 300,000 tonnes per year, which over 4 years will be more than 1 million tonnes, exhausting reserves and leading to sterilisation of the quarry. To support the well-being of future generations, resources should be safeguarded for those future generations and not rapidly used for short-term commercial gain. In light of this information and the fact that the current land bank reserves identified in the LTP are already in excess of 30 years, I would ask on behalf of the residents that the committee also refuse the application for the increase of mineral extraction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ralph. If you just hang on a sec while I see if there are any points of clarification members of the committee would like to ask you. I see no hands yet again. Oh, there, Councillor Perry. This is a matter of clarification.
It's a clarification, perhaps not from Ian Robinson. Maybe is that possible for us to vote on that second issue today?
Well, we'll come to that later in the debate. Okay. At this point, it's points of clarification of the person who's just spoken. Nobody, nothing. Thank you, Mr. Ralph. If you may now switch off and go silent and watch the proceedings. We do have another speaker. I believe local member, Councillor Morgan. Are you there, Michael? Hello, Michael. If you'd like to unmute yourself, you have the normal 3 minutes and the same procedures. 30 seconds before you'll be warned.
Right,
Carry on.
Starting from
when you start.
Okay, right. Well, Mr. Ralph has very succinctly stated the case for the residents, so there's not a great deal to add to that. I've been asked to speak today by the Welsh and Donalds Community Council, principally on behalf of the residents of Tyrone. There are 38 houses there in very close proximity to the quarry. My concern is, and I've read all the papers on this, in particularly the noise and vibration acoustic report, and the concern there, it doesn't seem to address the effect, past or future, directly on the residents of Tyrone. And in the acoustic report, it says that ground vibration from blasting can result in impacts that extend well beyond the production site, but that's not addressed further, but it clearly is affecting these houses. So really, I ask you to take into account what Mr. Ralph has said, what has been said in the petition. And today, if you refuse the application, I hope that the applicants will take on board what I've said about the residents so that they can include this in any future noise report. If you support the application, I would ask, there is certainly a condition requiring a proper report on the effect of this, or again, if it is to be deferred, can we have a more extensive report on the real effect on people who actually live in the vicinity of this quarry? I mean, there has been monitoring in individual properties closer to the quarry, but as Mr. Ralph has said, there are very real effects on people living locally, which could get worse. So that is all I have to say, and I think I'm well within my 3 minutes.
Thank you. Well done, Michael. I see Councillor Wilson, you have your hand up. I presume this is for a point of clarification from Councillor Morgan.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much, Councillor Morgan, for your presentation on that. And I think you made some additional points, which I think are very relevant. I mean, one thing I would like to find out, and obviously I'm not a resident of that particular area, is how close in terms of mileage or kilometres these residents are in relation to the quarry. That's the first question. And the second question is, in relation to the noise and the vibration, is that a planning matter? I know might be a question for Ian Robinson. And is that relevant to this application, directly relevant, or is it something that we could consider if we did have a different kind of application?
I think it's something that Ian Robinson can take up. I don't think Michael can tell you about the proximity, but I don't think Ian has a position to.
If you troll back, or if you look on the site for the application, and if you have a read of the assessment report, it's got some aerial photographs from Google which show the proximity of Tyrone to the quarry. It's just over the opposite side of the road from the quarry. If you go along the A48, you can't see the quarry and you can't see Tyrone, but they're very close to each other, and certainly audible to one another. But have a look. If you look at the it's called the In-Acoustic Noise and Vibration Assessment Report, but it's online with all the bundle of papers, and it's got maps and photographs, and it shows how they've assessed the application so far. And again, if you read it, you see, well, it doesn't really take into account or refer to the residents of Tyrone and the effect of past or future operations on them. Whether we're talking about noise and assessment in this application, I think we are, because it's a planning application and we have to take into account the effect on local residents. But I'll leave that perhaps to Ian to advise on, because it's perhaps more technical than my limited mind can appreciate.
Thank you. There being no other points of clarification, Michael, you may now switch off and go dark and everything and listen to the discussion. We have one speaker for, and again, this is Mr. John. Geraint, are you there?
I am, Chair. Thank you very much.
Unusual rules apply.
I understand. Thank you. Good afternoon again, members. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you on this item. I speak to you again to seek an agreement to defer. This request is to allow further time to allow the application before you to be formally revised by us and advanced by officers. In short, the application before you from a very clear and comprehensive report comprises 3 elements that are considered and agreed by officers to be entirely acceptable, these being the extraction of minerals, a recycling facility, and of course restoration of the site once all of this has been concluded. The scheme includes a proposal for the importation of material to achieve a final landform for the site that sees the land restored to agriculture, in effect its previous and original form. Despite there being no technical and statutory consultation objections to such proposals, this infill element remains to be considered unacceptable by your officers. In response, the applicant is prepared and willing to remove this element from the original scheme proposals and to discuss an end form for the site that does not involve the importation of such a quantity of material. And so, to be absolutely clear, this goes much further than the understanding relayed by your officers just now, i.e. not to the original approved levels, but well beyond that to a level that can be agreed with them in dialogue and will not involve the importation of substantial quantities of material, only that required for restoration. It's reasonable to conclude, if that change was made, that the proposals would be entirely acceptable to officers and would lead to a recommendation for approval. Your officers consider that pressing to determination would be preferable, whilst we suggest that the time, resource and effort required by all parties, were this to occur, would be better served and channelled into revising the current application. This is not least given the acceptance by officers of the other elements, particularly the extraction of mineral deposits, which are much needed, and that element is supported. The continuation of dialogue on this current application would allow for a quicker, more efficient, positive outcome to be reached, which would see the realisation of all the elements that are agreed and accepted as being appropriate, whilst omitting the single element that isn't. As a result, we consider it appropriate and reasonable to defer this application until such a time as we are allowed to present the application in its revised form, which hopefully will be entirely acceptable to all parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. John. Any points of clarification for Mr. John? I see no hands. In that case, oh, there's one. Councillor Hodges.
Hello, Mr. John. I was just wondering if you want to revise your application, would you consider withdrawing this, then putting in a new application?
Potentially we would, yes. The only difficulty with that is that, you know, as you probably know, there is a considerable amount of work involved in simply repackaging applications, rerunning the pre-application consultation process, time and delay that incurs. There's also obviously the administration, time and effort on officer side to set up the whole new application and consult. So it's very much with that saving in mind for all parties concerned that we consider it easier and quicker to deal with it under the guise of the current application.
Thank you, Mr. John. Any other points of clarification, or Nick, did you want to come back on that?
No, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Nick. Right, in that case,
we're past that stage, I think.
I think so. Ian Robinson. Then, in that case, Mr. John, thank you very much for your contribution. You may now go dark. Ian Robinson, then, please, if you could address the issues and introduce the discussion, if there is going to be one.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of points of clarification. Noise is very much a material consideration. The difficulty I feel we would have in refusing it for additional grounds is where there's the absence of a technical consultee, such as SRS, who take account of the noise assessment, air quality and vibration. In the absence of an objection from those officers, I think it would be difficult personally to substantiate a reason for refusal in that respect, and that's why one doesn't appear. Emphasis can be placed on no technical objections, but failing to comply with minerals policy is a big fundamental problem, and you can call that a technical objection or you can call it not a technical objection, but it's a clear problem. I take into account, I appreciate what the agent applicant have said regarding lowering the levels and the offer that might be lower than the previously consented levels, but terms have been used such as a level to be agreed, move it to it so it's such a quantity that might be acceptable, but to my mind there's no certainty there at all. And what certainty do we have that going forward, there's a simple agreement to this. I mean, we're already 7 months on from the case officer telling the applicant this is a waste disposal operation which doesn't meet policy. So I'm unclear on why there should be an expectation of a rapid agreement to a mutually agreeable solution. There's not been a prospect of that thus far. And in terms of time and effort, this isn't the main driver towards me recommending that the application be determined tonight, because I think we're at a position where, you know, enough time has gone by. But in terms of time and effort, case officer has put a huge amount of work into emails, phone calls, and a very long and detailed report. And I'll be completely frank, it's frustrating for officers that it's like brinkmanship, that when the applications come to committee, then it's the moment arises to kind of seriously take on board those concerns, because we've been trying to make those concerns clear for some time. And personally, I feel that adequate opportunity has been given for that to happen, and officers have expended a lot of time and effort in reaching this point and in preparing a report, as we are statutorily required to do. And yes, I agree that the agent and applicant have agreed to extensions of time for certain matters to be progressed with consultees, but those have been progressed with consultees now. And I feel members would be reasonable in making a decision on this application. That's a matter for members to consider, but that's my position on it.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Robinson. I have a hand up. I'm trying to see who's. Hang on. Councillor Cave, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to move officer recommendations.
Thank you very much indeed. Do I have a seconder for that?
Happy to second, Chairman.
Yeah, we've got a few hands up. I think Councillor Perks was first. In that case, do we have anyone who wishes to debate on this? Any discussion, or are we happy to go to the vote? It looks like we're happy. Councillor Perry.
Yeah, just following on, because there are two bits to this, and are we in favour of officer recommendations on both?
There's only one bit. It's the whole thing. It's
the whole thing. So we want to go complete with officer recommendations.
It's either for or against officers' recommendations. That's the yeah.
Yeah, and the extraction. Okay.
The extraction part isn't, I don't think, part of the. Or if you look at page 116, where it says recommendation refuse, then that's and the reasons for the recommendation. That's the on page 117. That's what we're voting on.
But for clarification, the proposal involves extraction. The recommendation doesn't involve a reason for refusal relating to extraction.
No, it's the other stuff. Okay, moving on. Unless I see, Christine, you still got your hand up. I assume that's a legacy hand, and unless I see any other hands going up, I'm assuming that we're all satisfied and approving of officers' recommendations. I see no indication to the contrary. That's therefore officers' recommendations are approved. Moving on to 2022-00397 RG3 land north of Home View Leisure Centre, Barry. We have no speakers as I understand it, but there are late reps on this. Don't think we've got any speakers on this, have we?
No registered speakers on this one, Chair.
No registered speakers. Right, in that case, moving straight on. Ian Robinson, perhaps you'd like to present this, please.
Thank you, Chair. As you mentioned, there are matters arising, so I'll deal with those first. Members will have seen in the package that the matters arising relate to additional comments and queries from Councillor Perry relating to a number of points, including matters relating to internal layout of the dwellings, the external layout of the development and parking and the kind of surfacing and footways, energy issues relating to solar panels, and one of the key issues raised was in relation to the Equality Act and public sector equality duty. I won't go through all the points in detail because there's quite a few there, so members I think will probably have seen those. If we come to the scheme, I'll give a brief run through on kind of the key points, and then I'll leave it to members to have the discussion. This is the site here, which is land to the north of Homeview Leisure Centre in. Sorry, can I just check? Am I sharing my screen here? Sorry,
You're not.
I'm
You're not.
talking.
You're not
Sorry,
at the moment.
Not very
sorry,
good.
Chair. I was talking then as if I was sharing. Here we go. I'm sharing now.
Yeah.
Great. So it's this land here outlined in red, sorry, which is land to the north of Homeview Leisure Centre in Bury, joined by dwellings to the west, joined by the first phase of this site, the site, kind of the wider site, if you like, to the east, and then the leisure centre to the south. So the land here that I'm kind of hovering the cursor over is land where dwellings have already been constructed, phase 1 in inverted commas. The land here, phase 1, and the application site together comprise an allocation in the council's local development plan. This application proposes 31 new dwellings accessed from phase 1 to the kind of the east of the site in kind of fairly conventional rows. The cul-de-sac here and then a turning head to enable larger vehicles to turn, with an open space area to the south. Here are some kind of indicative images of the appearance of the houses. You can see sort of fairly traditional in composition and form, with some kind of contemporary elements, build outs around the windows. Other plans are in the report. Officers view this as an acceptable kind of development of phase 2 of the allocation, where the principle of the development is established by its inclusion within the local development plan. There are no highway safety objections to the scheme, and the layout and design scale of the proposals satisfies kind of residential amenity standards. The only kind of, I guess, other key issue I'll touch on, which comes out of Councillor Perry's representations, is the kind of the public sector equality duty and the Equality Act. The local development plan, which allocates this land itself, went through an equalities impact assessment, as has the council's housing strategy. So we have sought legal advice on this, and are of the view that the equalities impact assessments referred to there ensure that the development and a decision to approve the development isn't contrary to any duty in the Equality Act or the public sector equality duty. I'm sure there'll be some further debate on that, but just to let members know that that matter has been looked into with the legal officer.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Robinson. Can now open the meeting to discussion. Do I have anybody wanting to come in to ask questions or of Councillor Robinson or of Councillor Ian Robinson or any comments to make? And I see none, in which case Councillor Perks.
Can we move officers' recommendations, please?
Thank you, Sandra. Councillor Perry.
I would propose that we defer this because I don't think any of us have seen the equality impact assessment, and if it's substandard, then this is liable to go to potential judicial review and legal action. I think we need to take equalities very seriously. I think those of us who were at the training session last night heard that it is a legal requirement. I've requested to see the equality impact assessment in good time, and nothing's been sent to me. What does it say about the shared surface? For those of you who are familiar with urban design, shared surfaces are very, very controversial. In the design access statement that was originally submitted, it refers to a 2 metre wide footway serving all properties. And what we've got is a scheme where only one property is served by a 2 metre wide footway, all the rest by a shared surface, the shared surface which is likely to have cars parked on it. So I've obviously raised quite a few things on that in writing. I have particular concerns for people with cognitive impairment, sensory impairment, and physical impairment. And those questions I've asked have not been answered. No equality impact assessment has been presented to me. None of us have seen that.
I think
it's very, very serious. On the other point, at plot 14, is it plot 14? The car belonging to the people, or car or van belonging to the people at number 13 is to be parked in front of the living room window. So a person arriving home and parking that parking space will be looking directly into the living room of the next door property. It may be a van that also shades that property. So that is just terrible, terrible design. It's bad design. It's thoughtless design. But the overriding thing is, until we see that equality impact assessment and know that that shared surface is safe and that it's been designed.
Yeah, you've made the point about the EIA, and I'll ask Ian Robinson to reply to that after along with other comments that may be coming up. Sandra, you've got your hand up. Did you want to speak again, or is that a legacy? You're talking, but I can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry. I just wondered if it was possible to. I know that Andrew Freegard is here, who is from housing, and I wondered whether we're able to sort of ask him any questions about that, or whether that's part of this actual meeting when we come to a decision. Obviously, I've moved officers' recommendations because I'm happy with the plans that have been put forward by the housing section. But I wondered whether there is the opportunity for that. I'd like guidance on that, whether Andrew can actually explain, or whether that is part of this. Chair.
When we get to that, I'll ask Andrew whether he can contribute. James, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, no, I don't think that Andrew is able to come in on that. Sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for clarification.
And Andrew, sorry, Andrew, could you turn your camera off as well? Sorry. That's all right.
Next up, I think, is Mark. Mark Wilson.
Thank you very much, Chair. I mean, obviously, I entirely support this, and I'd like to second this application.
Thank you, Mark. Helen Payne, Councillor Payne, your hand is up next.
Yeah, I wanted to second it, but I had a supplementary kind of question around, is the road access off Skoma Road, or is it off another road? Because it is kind of in my area in the East End of Barry. That was a consideration for me.
Okay,
I can't tell
Ian Robinson can respond to that. In that case, Ian, perhaps you'd like to respond to the questions that have been raised.
Yeah, I'll come back first. It is, so it's off the existing access. So the existing access off Skoma Road that serves the 11 or 12 houses, and then so the access will be via that existing access and off the top part of that. On the other points, I'll just take them in the order I've got them written down. In terms of the design access statement, there's no formal requirement that the statement has to be amended after a scheme is amended. In terms of the shared surface, the application has been assessed by our highways colleagues, and they will give a comprehensive and robust assessment of the highway layout and the engineering details that would comprise it. In terms of the equalities impact assessment, the Act doesn't say specifically that a development of this size has to be accompanied by an equalities impact assessment. Now, it may be that a development of a certain size, whether this size, smaller or larger, may be subject to an equalities impact assessment, particularly if it is in a context which means it has a particular relationship with people of protected characteristics that might be impacted by it. That's not to say that every planning application at all or of this size legally has to be accompanied by an equalities impact assessment. My understanding is that there is not a specific equalities impact assessment carried out by the council's housing team in respect of this development, but that is not a legal requirement. As far as we can see, there's nothing in the Act that says that's the case. All guidance that I've seen says that it is not a prescriptive thing that an equalities impact assessment must be submitted to this development. You have to show, in considering your public sector equality duty, show that you are actually thinking about and giving consideration to the things that are contained within the Equality Act. But that does not mean that there's a prescriptive legislative requirement for that assessment for this kind of planning application, and it's not a planning legislative requirement. But as I mentioned earlier, there have been equalities impact assessments that have informed the local development plan and housing strategy that this site sits within and compliant with the policies of.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Councillor Perry, you have something to come back on?
Yeah, that conflicts with advice that I received from a charity and conflicts, I believe, with our training last night. And we are offering a service here as a council. We've got two hats here, developer and planning authority. I will move that we defer this until we get legal advice.
We already have a motion to accept officer's recommendation.
Chair, do you want me to come in?
Yes, please, James.
Yeah, so I think I just echo what Ian has said. We've had a look, we've been through this and had a look at it. The way that the duty arises is not that it needs a specific equality impact assessment on every individual application. As Ian said, the LDP, of which this was an allocated site, had an extensive equality impact assessment done on it, as did the council's housing strategy. That we believe is sufficient for us to show that we have complied in terms of being able to show that we have considered the Equalities Act, and therefore it doesn't need a specific individual one, which is why there isn't one for this application.
There isn't one, but there's a shared service.
No.
Ian,
it's not an argument or a debate in that.
Well, it's a legal thing, isn't it?
No, it isn't. It isn't. You've had an answer to your question. It has been clarified now by both
LDP is irrelevant to a shared
You
service.
have now had a response from both Ian Robinson and from James Doherty on your point. There's no point carrying on arguing something that's been answered. So moving on, we have a motion on the table to approve officer's recommendations. Can I see if there are any hands, if there's anybody opposed to that? Otherwise, we'll accept it. Ian Perry, you are opposed to that?
Conduct.
Ian Perry, you're opposed to the officers. You're voting against officers' recommendations. Councillor Bruce, you have your hand up.
Against officer's recommendation.
Oh, you want to vote against as well. In that case, we will go to a vote. And let me just have a look at my voting sheets. I can find them. I've got them here somewhere. And we'll go through the voting sheet as we have people for and against. Right. I'm for officers' recommendations. Councillor Perks.
For officers' recommendation.
Councillor Birch.
For officers' recommendation.
Councillor Bruce.
Against.
Against. Councillor Cave.
Against.
Councillor Champion.
For.
For, thank you. Councillor Cope.
For.
Councillor Drake.
For officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Ernest.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Gilligan's not with us. Councillor Hodges.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Obliged. For.
Thank you. Councillor Payne.
For officer's recommendation.
Councillor Perry.
Against.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Stallard.
Obliged. For.
Thank you. Councillor Williams isn't here, and Councillor Wilson.
For officer's recommendation.
6, 7, 8. Make that 12-3 in favour of officers' recommendations. That's carried. Moving on then to the last one on here is 2022/00642/full 8 Mountjoy Close, Penarth. Again, there are, I believe, no outside speakers, although I think Councillor Buckley is with us and may want to speak on this as well. Yes, he's there. He's got his hand up. In that case, Ian Robinson, would you like to present this, please?
Yes, Chair, thank you. I'll share my screen so members can see the photographs and plans. So this is an application for extensions and alterations to number 8 Mountjoy Close in Penarth. The works comprise squaring off the roof. We call it a kind of hip to gable conversion. So at the moment, I'll show the photograph. At the moment, the roof has a profile like this. The applicant proposes to square off that hip roof into a gable and to construct a dormer extension in the rear elevation, as shown on the plan here, set down from the ridge across from the side and up from the eaves. There is a nominal raising of the ridge and a single story extension that effectively wraps around the property, so around the rear, along the side, as you can see in this plan here that says elevation to drive, and around the front. So the principal issues here to consider are the impact on neighbours and the design and kind of character of the extension. In terms of the design, we acknowledge that the kind of, in particular, the squaring of the hip to the gable would have a kind of a nominal, in our view, an imbalancing effect on kind of the balance of the semi-detached pair. Those works wouldn't be permitted development in this case because of the relationship between dwelling and the road, albeit it's worth pointing out that in the vast majority of semi-detached properties, and I think pretty much every other house almost in this street, those works would be permitted development, and the dormer at the rear would be also. It's something we take into account because those works have been deemed acceptable as permitted development because they're not, broadly speaking, significant works in the context of an alteration to a dwelling house, in the same way that you can extend a ground floor to a certain size. Officers don't feel that the extent of the change to the roof form, particularly in a context where there's a number of other dwellings that have either been extended with kind of dormers to the side or squaring them off and dormers at the rear, as you can see on that second photo there. We don't feel that that's a significant kind of or harmful intervention to the character of the house or the balance of the pair or the character of the street as a whole. The officer's report does provide kind of assessment of the impact on neighbouring properties. We're happy that the extensions don't present any unacceptable overlooking impacts. There would be some views from windows in the dormer towards neighbouring gardens, but those are largely views that are already existing and available from first floor windows. Again, that's kind of, we consider the kind of the basis of when something is brought within the permitted development rights regulations is that dormers on the rear of properties are, and again, in the vast majority of cases, permitted development, and they will, in most cases, in residential contexts, have a level of overlooking towards neighbouring gardens. But in most residential contexts, there is an element of kind of mutual overlooking sideways from windows, first floor windows in particular, and roofs towards neighbours' gardens. So it's very difficult to achieve a situation where there's no overlooking whatsoever. We don't feel that the level of overlooking would exceed what is kind of typical in a residential context such as this. We don't feel that the single story extension is kind of prejudicial to the character of the street, nor should it have a material effect on kind of the visibility for cars kind of either reversing into or out of spaces. So the recommendation is for approval, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ian. Right, I think actually I need to bring in Ian Buckley if he does want to speak. He did indicate to me previously that he did.
Yes,
Ian?
if I can, please, Neil.
Yeah, you have the normal 3 minutes that you've seen going on with everybody else.
Thank you. I've been down to Mountjoy Close and spoken with the residents, the majority of which are against this development, but I'll read out the objections which were sent to me, condensed from the one neighbour. Objection to the proposed loft conversion. The other loft conversions in the close, which are numbers 2 and 7, have maintained the original 1930s hip structure, is appropriate to the area of the houses. The proposed gable end loft conversion would be out of character with these, having a negative visual impact and changing the character of the building. It would also be detrimental to the street scene of the close, which currently is balanced, causing it to lose a symmetrical appearance and visual sense of space. It will be overbearing and is out of scale with other loft conversions in the close. The conversion to a gable end would mean a loss of daylight at the front of number 7 Mountjoy Close. The second story window will overlook the close and cause a loss of privacy. The large dormer extension on the rear of the roof is much bigger and out of scale with others in the close. and it would lead to a lack of privacy and overlooking other houses. In respect of the proposed single-storey side and rear extension with a new porch, this is an overdevelopment of the property, inappropriate to the size of the site. It would be overbearing and out of scale in comparison with other houses in Mountjoy Close. It will have a detrimental visual impact on the street scene. Mountjoy Close is open and symmetrical, and this will be out of character with the close as a whole, negatively affecting its appearance from multiple angles, including from Mountjoy Avenue, the opening to the close. The proposed porch and side elevation would be a visual infringement on the access to the close, with health and safety implications for drivers, with the external wall being too near to the roadway actually in the close. It would overcrowd the site and roadway, being detrimental to both residents and the appearance of the close as a whole. Number 8 Mountjoy is currently adjacent to their property, number 7. The proposed changes to the side and rear walls would mean that the corner and side rear walls would come in front of number 7, effectively meaning their property would be behind it as opposed to adjacent. This would close off number 7 from the rest of the close, obscuring their house with a loss of daylight and causing potential security issues, particularly at night. As is too close to a house, numbers 5 and 6 Mountjoy would also be partially obscured. The proposed numerous windows, as well as an external door on the side elevation, mean a loss of privacy. Sorry for reading so fast. I was trying to get it all in the 3 minutes.
Well done. You managed to do so. Are there any points of clarification, Councillor Buckley? I see none. Although, no, maybe Pam. No, Pam, did you ever? No. In that case, we'll move on to the committee part now. Thank you, Ian. Ian Robinson first. Is there anything you want to address from what Councillor Buckley raised?
Got a hand up currently.
I see Councillor Birch has a hand up, but I think she wants to take part of it as local member, and will be the first to speak as part of the discussion after Ian's responded to the speaker.
No, I've got nothing to add there, Chair.
In that case, Rhiannon, Councillor Birch as local member.
Thank you. I would say that Councillor Buckley has covered virtually everything that I wanted to say. So I'll just make the point that I feel this is overdevelopment of the site. The houses are set in pairs and largely preserve the symmetrical appearance that makes houses of this era so attractive. The house is set on a corner and the development will take up all of the side garden, making the entrance to the close lopsided and be overbearing. Several of the residents have complained on exactly these grounds. If the application is allowed and the extension is built, the house will lose its context because it will lose the space around it that makes the road so nicely spaced and pleasant to walk along and observe. For these reasons, I can't support the application.
Thank you, Councillor Birch. Councillor Ernest, you have your hand up.
Yes, Chairman. I'm going to support the local members on this. There are several of these small closes in Penarth, and they're very nicely laid out. They're all part of the Penarth Garden Village concept, going back, I suppose, to the late 20s, early 30s. And the houses were well designed. They're very popular, and they also sell for good sums of money as well. But that's an irrelevance. I'm supporting the local members because I feel that within the close concept, where the houses do go round in a semicircle, for want of a better description, that any major extensions to any one of the properties is detrimental to the overall street scene. And in particular, I think it's detrimental to the adjoining properties as well. So in a nutshell, Chairman, I will support the objection to the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, you have your hand up next.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I really appreciate the comments already made, especially by Councillor Ernest and Councillor Birch in relation to this application. I equally agree that the Gardeners Village is a very special part of Penarth, and I would compare it in many ways, like in the community of Ribina, which is so similar in design in lots of aspects. And if anyone goes up to Ribina, you will see what I mean. And it's something that we do need to keep. But I am concerned that there has been some encroachments in the past here, which has not been helpful. in that community. And I really feel we do need to make a stance on this. And I'm happy to support the local member. Thank you.
Councillor Perks, you have your hand up now.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I just wondered if, yeah, I think that's been said already, that whether there are other of these 1930s houses that have already had this done within that area. Also, whether you know, if they've already had that done, why would we say that this house couldn't have the side gable extended and stuff like that? I don't know if the officer can tell me whether other houses have already had that extension.
I'll ask Ian Ian Robinson to reply when we've had all the questions in. Councillor Cave, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd just like to confirm my support for everything that the local members, including Anthony Ernest, has said, and I'm in favour of supporting them.
That's opposing officers' recommendations. Councillor Perry, you have your hand up now.
Yeah, I just had a quick look on satellite pictures, and some of the gable ends have been changed, but not to the extent where you've got the rigid angle. They're all sort of slanted in some way. So some have been altered, but not as radically as this one. And I think we've had discussions on roof line changes before on street scenes. So I will probably be supporting the members who've spoken.
Thank you very much indeed. Do I have a motion then? No one's moving anything yet. Ian Robinson, perhaps you'd like to respond to everybody first, and then we'll call for a motion.
Yeah, fine. Just so we're kind of absolutely clear on everything in terms of context. There is at least one example of another dwelling with the full kind of hip to gable, not in this street. So alterations in this street are limited to a kind of a dormer extension coming out of the side of the hip. And I think one of the photos we saw, which isn't necessarily in this street, but you see in the context of the application dwelling when looking back towards the rear of it, is another example where you've got the kind of the dormer on the side. So yeah, I'd agree the more common treatment of extending to the side of roof level has been dormers, albeit there is at least one example of the gabling, but not in Mountjoy Close itself. It's a matter of judgment, I think, isn't it? What an opinion? What is a more appropriate way of dealing with adding accommodation to your roof? I think extending roof level is quite popular in this area, I think, because the sites are quite constrained. So there's not a great deal of space to kind of extend, 2 stories, for example, into your garden. So that's why things are quite popular at roof level. My own view is that in terms of the balance, having a squaring the hip to gable is less noticeable. There's been times when I've subsequently noticed a hip to gable on properties where I haven't before, because it's kind of a less complex roof form. So in my view, having kind of part hip, part dormer is kind of draws your eye more in terms of the impact on the balance of the roof planes. That being said, obviously members are perfectly entitled to be of the opinion, which is that a lesser intervention like a dormer on the side would be more appropriate. Similarly, members will be entitled to come to the view that they don't feel any intervention into the roof plane is acceptable. Officer's recommendation is as it is because we feel that it's acceptable on balance. It's not a case where I feel that the alternative point of view is obviously unarguable or indefensible at all. It's a design judgment, which I'd say different parties will take different conclusions on.
Thank you, Ian. Right, Councillor Birch, you have your hand up.
Move refusal.
Councillor Wilson.
Second refusal.
Okay, so we have a motion for refusal of officer recommendations. Do I see anybody wishing to vote in favour of officers' recommendations? In that case, there being no dissent, we are voting against officers' recommendations in this case. And Ian, you have your hand up now.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to establish with the legal officer and Democratic Services that what the process is regarding. Does there need to be a reason provided before that, or does that come afterwards?
Yeah,
I think the reasons have been given, which is the balance. Perhaps Councillor Birch, who made the motion, can sum up her reasons for.
Balance, overdevelopment, and the lack of amenity space at the side, though I didn't mention that previously, but to do with the street scene and the lack of balance there would be between the pairs of houses and overdevelopment of the site in the context.
Is that okay, James?
Yeah, I just wondering whether Ian, do you want to?
Do you want me to put that in? Do you want me to compose specific reasons? If we take 5 minutes, I can compose specific reasons and then come back and read those out to you.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to have it in kind of planning parlance, if you will.
Yep, that's fine. In that case, we will, I guess, take a few minutes break, and it gives people a chance to refresh themselves as well. 5 minutes.
Hello?
Yes, can we restart the recording?
Yeah, I have.
Thank you, Chair. We've restarted.
That's okay. Right then, Ian Robinson, you have the wording.
Thanks. I have a wording. While I was writing that, it occurred to me that with householder planning applications, the report comprises the officer's statement in the appeal. And obviously, as it stands, there's only a report recommending approval. So whilst I can give a reason now, we wouldn't have a kind of a report to put forward as a statement. So I would, again, I'll take advice from James on this, but obviously we would have the option potentially of deferring and reporting it back with a report, or I don't know whether the procedure would allow for, if members were agreed for a report to be provided with an agreed reason, kind of under delegated powers, what would be the most appropriate?
Technically, we voted on this, and we've agreed agreed to reject officers' recommendations. The grounds of which I think have been made by Councillor Birch. Councillor Johnson, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was just referring to precedent, which I think around this, which was the White Houses last year, it was already earlier this year, where I believe that we adjourned and there was a report to the following meeting. Is that what happened? I don't know if James can remember.
I believe you're right. I do remember that. It was before the election. Yes, it was under the previous regime. Councillor Wills, yeah, I mean that would be acceptable if that's acceptable to committee. Mark.
Yeah, I'd just like to explore the other option that Ian mentioned about to comments to James Doherty, the principal lawyer, about delegated powers in terms of delegation. Because if we run it again, then obviously we made a decision, all right, to oppose the application. As far as I'm concerned, that will be binding upon a subsequent planning meeting because matters haven't changed. And I want that to be established. So I wonder, perhaps, can we look at delegation? If we can't look at delegation, then I'll take it what Ian Johnson, Councillor Johnson has rightly said, I believe, that we are binded by what we've said today, and there's no reason why we wouldn't necessarily rehash the whole argument again.
My recall is that with the White Houses that Ian Johnson referred to, that's exactly what we did. Was we were bound at the next meeting to basically confirm the reasons for rejection that were brought to that meeting. Before I call Ian Robinson back in, Anthony, you have your hand up.
Yes, Chairman, I'm supporting Councillor Mark Wilson on this because previous practice, and I'm going back many moons now, is that if committee is minded to refuse the application, which on the present sounds it looks as though it will be, we effectively are then giving officers the mandate to prepare the reasons for refusal, and that will simply go through the normal procedures. I think bringing it back to committee in 4 weeks' time is inconvenient both for the applicant, the officers, and indeed the members as well. So I support Councillor Wilson's viewpoint that we mandate under delegated powers Ian and his team to compile relevant reasons for committee objecting to the application.
James, is that legal?
I think what we need to do, the way that it's that is run now, is you need to have the reasons for refusal set out at the point of taking the vote for refusing the application. So we need to do that today. What you could do is give then delegated power to Ian and his team to prepare the statement to be attached to the final decision notice.
Yeah.
So I think that we have made clear our reasons today for refusal in terms of street view, in terms of
I think we were going to get Ian to sort of put those into sort of planning terms so that it's very clear on the decision notice.
Yeah, have you got that, Ian?
Yeah. Okay,
Well,
so
can you read
I'll read out that, and then the members can decide if they're happy with this. So what I've written is, by reason of their design, form and siting, the proposed extensions and alterations would be harmful to the appearance of the dwelling, the balance of the semi-detached pair, and the spacious and consistent character of the street. The development would therefore be contrary to policies MD2 and MD5 of the Vale of Glamorgan adopted local development plan 2011 to 2026, and the advice within the council's supplementary planning guidance on residential and householder development and 1012 design.
Okie doke. Is that acceptable to everybody?
Yes.
Yep, I see hands up and thumbs up, and see nobody saying no. In that case, that is I believe that's the decision of the committee.
Yeah, with the delegated power to the planning team to provide the statement to to go with the decision notice.
That's right. Okay. In that case, thank you all for that. In that case, I have no items under anything. I have nothing under item 9 or under part 2. Thank you all for your patience this afternoon, and see you next time. Thank you. Have a good evening.